Hi, Hanky Pasanky here again. We're continuing to work on this dragon egg. So far, did a basic color, and then waxed in all the scales, and then etched back all the area between the scales with acid magic, and then scrubbed it down with some baking soda, and then rinsed all that off, and it's now mostly dried out. So you can see this is the area where I used the white wax, and this is the area with just the plain uncolored beeswax, a little bit of soot from the traditional Delran Kiska over a candle flame. So now that I've got, and then I opened up the hole just so that it could breathe and dry out properly. So I'm going to get some dye on this, slightly more time-consuming way because I don't feel like putting it in a Ziploc bag for this. But the Ziploc bag works really well for these because they're just a little bit too big to put in your regular, you can't get that in a mason jar. So I'm just going to use just a super, well, it actually at some point probably was a pretty nice watercolor brush. At this point, I also do, though, sometimes if I am painting on like India ink accents on the end or a metallic kind of leaf, I will often use makeup brushes, because makeup brushes make really good detail brushes without having to go to a fancy art store to find them. You can get pretty good precise detail. So basically what I'm doing is dyeing all the area that was etched back, which you can see is very, very light because I took off most of the outer layers of the emu eggshell on that. Now I didn't take it all the way back. It's still got a pretty good light blue there. You can etch it back quite a bit further into the white before it actually gets fragile. But because I do assume that most of these are used for cosplay, which means I anticipate that people are going to be handling them, picking them up, holding them, maybe dropping them occasionally. I don't want to destabilize them any more than necessary. So I give it just enough etch so that you get really obvious dimension on the scales without taking it too far down. Also, it doesn't matter if it's white because, I'm just dyeing it black anyways. And then the nice thing about the dye is that it will also kind of seep in if perchance you've etched it. Now, I don't usually use that strong acid. Usually I just use plain old household vinegar, in which case I put in a really big, like gallon or at least half-gallon plastic container. Now the problem then is you have to either weight it down because, if it's empty, it's super buoyant and it's going to float, and it has to be fully submerged in acid for it to etch. And ideally you want it to be just heavy enough that it's submerged, but not so heavy that it sinks all the way to the bottom, because then you get a kind of bald spot where it's in contact with the bottom of the jar. So for that, the best thing is if it's still intact, but it's not super easy to find intact emu eggs. So if it's not still intact and you've had to blow it out, you can also fill it up with sand, like craft sand. Makes a pretty good ballast but you do have to fill it pretty much all the way. I've tried using BB pellets, I've tried using pie weights and lead weights, and then usually if I use those, I still have to fill the darn thing up with sand, which is dusty and a little bit messy. That's not my favorite thing, so that is why I decided to use the acid magic this time, because it is much faster. When I do it with just vinegar, usually I'll leave it in for about an hour and then rotate it and then do another hour and then give it a good scrub with one of those baby toothbrushes and put it in another for an hour Scrub it again, rotate it, another hour. I think it sometimes goes up. Sometimes it can be like 6 hours, as few as 6 hours. And sometimes it'll be as many as like 12 to 14. Kind of depends on how stubborn the eggshell is and how strong and fresh the acid is. I unfortunately wasted a lot of time early on when I was working with these eggs reusing vinegar from one egg to the next. But the thing is, when you're dealing with a chemical reaction of a basic eggshell and the acid in vinegar, the vinegar loses its acidity and the pH raises every time you use it. So it stops being effective pretty fast. Now, you can dissolve citric acid in it, and you can buy citric acid in bulk. It's pretty cheap, but that's a lot of work to keep doing. Didn't stop me from doing it quite a few times. What I like about this step is you can kind of see it really start to emerge here. So, especially with these scales with the white wax, it makes them look a lot lighter than they actually are. They will be that dark that it was before I started waxing in the scales. And then when all of this is dry, about 20-30 minutes, I will melt off the wax of the scales, which I don't know if I can video, but you can watch that on other channels. It's pretty simple. I use the oven method, so I heat up the oven to the very lowest setting, about 120 degrees, and then once it's preheated, I have a small board with about 3 big nails. Put a little piece of tin foil over that to catch the drippings. Put it in for a minute, not very long, just until the wax gets soft. And reach in there with some paper towels, pull it out, wipe off a bunch of the wax, put it back in, do some more, and so on until all the wax is gone. And then because I did etch this, that makes the shell just a little bit more delicate and a little bit more porous. I'll spray on a little bit of olive oil, just a really thin layer, and kind of work that into the grooves between the scales to help the wax melt off faster and smoother and not get stuck in these grooves. And it will still get stuck in these grooves. And I will sit here with a toothpick and clean out some of that wax schmutz afterwards to maintain that depth. I think it would probably be better with a heat gun if you worked it so that you were heating the underside and then just let some of the scale wax drip off and then some more will drip off. Because the downside of having all of this delicate area that's etched is that it's really hard to get melted wax out of the grooves once it gets there. So now I'm just checking this for holidays. Sometimes I'll get air bubbles, but I can also touch that up later with a marker, a water-based marker or a felt tip pen, if I need to. There we go. Oh, I did drip some black dye. It happens. And there's the nose. And there's the bottom.